Hey guys, welcome to another Budget Commander deck overview, and this time we've got a special treat for you all. We got Karona, False God, and I have to say that this is probably my favorite Commander deck that I've ever gotten into play that's budget. It's so unique and it's so fun, and people can't get mad when you beat them with it. I get so many compliments for this thing. It's awesome. The deck isn't my own. I found it on MTG Salvation, and you can see the link and credits in my article. But yeah, so moving into the general herself. Karona, False God. This badass demigod comes out on 6. She's a 5/5 haster just by herself, and when she attacks, she gives creature types of your choice +3/+3 until end of turn. So she herself is an avatar. You can pump just her, and she's swinging as an 8/8. Or if you're swinging with other creatures, you can pump those up and give them +3/+3 if they share creature types. So she's versatile in how she attacks, and she always does massive damage. Even by herself, swinging as an 8/8, she's dealing 24 damage in 3 hits. So she can actually 3-shot opponents with lethal commander damage just by herself. So she does massive damage just for 6 mana. And the downside isn't actually a downside. But what the downside is that at the beginning of each player's upkeep, they untap Karona and get control of her. So in theory, what would be happening is you play Karona, you swing with her, and then your opponents get control of her on their turn and swing back at you. But actually, this downside is the deck's main strength, and is the reason why Karona is so deceptively powerful. What this deck wants to do is it actually makes sure that Karona cannot attack you. So what happens is you play Karona, you swing at somebody, your opponents get control of her, and since they cannot swing at you, they're going to be using her to swing at your opponents. So your opponents are essentially just doing the dirty work for you, helping you kill themselves for you. That's right, like, Karona comes into play, she deals damage to one person on your behalf, then your opponents use her to deal further damage to your opponents. Like, they just kill themselves for your sake. It's great. And yeah, so the way she does this, the primary way she does this, is with some of the jankiest commander decks that came with the pre-constructed lists, and probably the first cards that people usually take out of the deck, the Vows. And the fun thing about this deck is the Vows are actually probably the most powerful cards you can play in the deck. They are really good here. What they do, all of them do, is they buff the enchanted creature, but the downside is the creature cannot attack you, the controller of the aura. So in most cases, this is just like a neat little janky political card where you just throw it on a big threat, and that big threat can no longer swing at you. So it's neat, but it's usually junk and people take it out. But in this deck, you enchant Karona with it, and then when Karona is and Karona becomes buffed by it, so she's dealing even more damage. And when Karona goes to your opponent's side, your opponents physically cannot attack you with her because of the Vow. So you're buffing Karona, making her deal more damage, and you're making sure that your opponents cannot swing back at you with Karona, and instead attack at other people. So they're fantastic, and I'm running all 5 of them because they're so good. I would say the Vow Wilderness, Vow Lightning, and Vow Flight are the best ones. I would say Vow Flight is the best of the best, but all of them, their main function is to make sure the Karona doesn't attack you, so I'm running all of them. So I broke this deck down to a couple categories. We got the Vows here, but we also got a whole Pillow Fort package, which are additional ways of making sure primarily that Karona doesn't attack you, but they also have the secondary purpose of making sure you can't be attacked, period. I mean, what's really good at stopping Karona is usually a good way of stopping other opponents, any opponent from attacking you, really, with any creature. So I'm running an entire Pillow Fort package to make sure I'm not being dealt damage by anybody. And I noticed when I was building the entire Pillow Fort package that I was running a really high volume of enchantment cards. So I kind of took this a step further, and I made an enchantment-based themed deck. out of the entire deck. So you're going to see that I'm running I think 38 enchantments in total. So I'm running a lot of enchantment cards matter type cards as well, which I'll get to a little bit later. But yeah, so we have Vow of Duty, and then we also have a Pillow Fort package. Some of the basic stuff where your opponents are forced to pay mana to attack you. We got Ghostly Prison, Propaganda, Sphere of Safety, Windborne Muse, Kazul in the same vein. All force your opponents to either attack somebody else or pay mana to attack you. And generally, just dropping a single Propaganda on the field will make your opponents start attacking other people, which keeps your life total high and robs your opponents of life that they wouldn't have lost if you were being attacked anyway. So it has very subtle power in these Propaganda effects, and they're very, very powerful in a multiplayer political format. We also take it a little bit step further. We got Blazing Archon, obviously just creatures can't attack you, period. You have no option to do so. And he's a giant beater. We got Fog Bank, which is a perfect way of shutting down really high damage single threats, of which Karona is a big obvious one. Basically, if an opponent has control of Karona and you have a Fog Bank on the field, there's no incentive for them to swing Karona at you. They're just going to swing at somebody else. We also got repeatable fogs on the stick, Spike Weaver, and Night Captain Vios. Though we have some Rattlesnakes, which are really fun. These basically have the unspoken understanding that if an opponent attacks you with this on the field, these Rattlesnakes on the field, you're going to ruin the opponent's day. So High Priest of Penance, just a 1/1 dude, doesn't really do anything. But if I block a creature or an opponent attacks into me, I'm going to block with the High Priest of Penance, and then I'm going to blow up one of my opponent's stuff. So there's an unspoken understanding that when these cards are on the field, you don't get attacked, and they're very, very effective in this regard. We got High Priest for doing that. Another Rattlesnake is Archon of Justice, just a beefier High Priest, essentially. We got a couple other Rattlesnakes. Here we got the Seals. Seal of Primordium and Seal of Cleansing. They do the same thing, but they're on the field, and they can blow something up if they need to. But the unspoken understanding is, if you attack me, I'm going to blow up one of your artifacts or enchantments. So they just sit on the field. You don't have to actually blow up anything, and they have very, very strong indirect power just sitting on the field, making them very, very, very powerful. Then we got a whole bunch of ramp, very typical green ramp stuff. I always talk about in my videos. Nothing really changes, but we have some unique things for my enchantment-based deck. Fertile Ground and Trace of Abundance are mana ramp, but they are attached to a land, so they have a little bit of risk. The Fertile Ground, Dawn's Reflection is just a bigger version of it. If you lose that land, then you're essentially 2 for 1, and that's not really cool. But Trace of Abundance is really neat because it doesn't have that problem. It gives the land Shroud, so you can't be Strip Mined, you can't be Tectonic Edged or whatever to lose a 2 for 1. So it's all the benefit without the risk, and it's an enchantment, so that's awesome. Oracle of Modiah, I always say it's my favorite green card, and still is. Then we got the broken enchantments that double your mana, Mirari's Wake, Mana Reflection, ridiculous. Chromatic Lantern, awesome for a 5-color deck. Just all of a sudden, all your lands tap for all the mana, rather. So yeah, the ramp package, always very big, as usual, and pretty typical. And then we got card draw and tutors. Sylvan Library, obviously very, very powerful. You don't even have to draw cards off it. You just get to make sure you draw whatever you really want to draw. So that's always very powerful. We got a lot of Enchantresses. Well, the ones that were affordable, at least. Enchantress's Presence, Mesa Enchantress, and Verduran Enchantress, and they all do the same thing. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you draw a card. So since this is an enchantment deck, it keeps your hand nice and full always. And if these type of creatures aren't dealt with kind of immediately, then I sort of run away with the game because I just draw an absurd amount of cards off them. Core Spirit Dancer is basically the same thing, a little bit worse because you only draw a card off an aura spell, but she can also function as a beater if necessary. You just drop a Vow on her and she's swinging for like at least 4 damage. So she's pretty neat. Then we got Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora. I always talk about how awesome these 2 cards are, and my opinion has not changed on them. So yeah, they're just awesome ways of drawing a bunch of cards. Then we have another fairly interesting option here, 3 Dreams. You get to tutor up 3 enchantment aura cards, and that's basically insane card advantage and insane tutorage for a very insane price. What more can I say? Essentially what this does is usually grab a Vow or 2, and then you also grab one of your removal packages that are enchantment form. Arrest, for example, can deal with like a high threat, especially a commander, because it shuts down the commander. The commander can no longer do anything, and you're also denying it from going back to the command zone to be recast. So it's sitting there and it's useless until the arrest actually is dealt with. So very, very powerful way of dealing with enemy commanders. We also have Lignify and Faith's Fetters as doing the same thing. Tutorable answers to problematic permanents. Then we got a lot of other disruption abilities. We got Energy Flux, which is probably one of the biggest artifact hosers in the format, but nobody really runs it. So here's a cool little gem I get to show off to you guys. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, they sacrifice an artifact unless they pay 2. This deck only runs a single artifact, so Energy Flux really does nothing to me, while it hoses a lot of decks that I come across. People get very upset when I play Energy Flux. In a similar vein, Stonely Silence also screws over artifacts, most of them at least. Then we got a lot of other sorts of disruption. Aura of Silence is similar to the seals, as it's a rattlesnake. It slows down your opponents, and you can also destroy an artifact or enchantment on demand. So incredibly powerful here. We got some graveyard hate, as I usually do, because I would say like 95% of all EDH decks out there will be using the graveyard to some extent. So something like Leyline of the Void, where you're just exiling all your opponent's graveyards, is very, very powerful in this format. Similar vein, we also got Rest in Peace. It also exiles all graveyards, denies sacrifice effects to do. So these 2 cards are the ultimate hosers of graveyards in EDH, I'd say. And thankfully they're both enchantments, so that's also double bonus for the enchantment deck. We also got some creature board wipes. We got obviously the Austere Command, which is a creature board wipe and then some. But we also got Winds of Wrath, which is a very unique way of dealing with creatures in this particular deck, because Karona is usually going to be on the board with the Vow on her or some sort of enchantment. Sorry. Because she's usually forward up, you can wipe the board of basically everybody but her when she has a Vow on her, so that's awesome. Or you just wipe the board in general. Just, yeah, pretty good. Then we got an Enchantment Matters type of card. Blightcaster is a new guy who came out in M14, and whenever you cast an enchantment, and since this deck has like 38 of them, you get to machine gun down a creature that's a weenie. So you get to take out like ramp creatures or just utility dudes that are kind of small with Blightcaster. So he's been very powerful so far. I'm pretty impressed. What else? Oh yeah, so we have this whole Pillow Fort package, which makes it very, very difficult for this deck to actually be attacked. So I figured, why not take it a little bit further, and if you can't be attacked, why let opponents actually sit around doing nothing and being afraid of attacking with their creatures, why not just force them to attack and see what happens from it? So I have 3 ways of actually forcing opponents to attack once you're all pillow forted up. So Avatar Slaughter forces everybody to attack and have double strike. Fumiko forces just opponents to attack, and Grand Melee forces everybody to attack and everybody to block. So you pillow fort up, you make it impossible for you to be attacked, and then you drop one of these babies on the field, and suddenly all your opponents are dealing massive damage to each other each and every single turn, while you just sit back and relax and take no damage and watch how your opponents literally kill themselves just for your own amusement. It's fantastic. And then finally we got a couple cards here that don't really fit into any category, but they're also very, very powerful. Open the Vaults and Retether are 2 ways of getting a lot of enchantments back on the field from your graveyard. They're basically late game cards. Once the game has kind of whittled down a bit and you have like 5+ enchantments in your graveyard, you do Open the Vaults after you wiped people's graveyards of Leyline of the Void or whatever, so they get no value. You get like 5+ enchantments on the field, and then that's just game. Sun Titan, amazing recursion, probably the best recursion in white so far. Luminarch Ascension, if you're pillow forting up, you might as well run this guy, because your opponents can't attack you, and then when they can't attack you, suddenly you're paying 2 mana to make an infinite amount of 4/4 angel tokens with flying. It's insane. And it end games. Yeah, it's really good. On a similar note, Bloodchief Ascension, if you can't be attacked, then your opponents are generally going to be attacking each other, and that gets counters on the Bloodchief Ascension, and then when stuff starts dying, or people discard or whatever, you're starting to deal a lot of damage and gain lots of life with this really innocent looking enchantment. Then finally, Sigil of the Empty Throne. Obviously, if you're running tons of enchantments, making a 4/4 angel token each time you cast an enchantment, and like I said, there's like 38 of them, it's very, very powerful. So yeah, that's pretty much the deck. I think I went over the lands, or maybe I didn't. Well, the land base is pretty typical. Just going to reiterate then. It's the large tri-lands, which come into play tapped and tap for 3 colors. Command Tower taps for everything. Exotic Orchard taps for anything your opponents can produce, any colors your opponents can produce. So it's usually 4 to 5 colors it can do. Grand Colosseum comes to play tap, but then can tap for any color. Rupture's Spire is a little bit slow, but taps for any color, and same thing with Transguild Promenade. We got the Vivid Lands, which come to play tapped. Tap for a specific color, but then can also remove a charge counter to tap for any color. Bojuka Bog, another way of getting rid of an opponent's pesky graveyard, so no recursion for them. Shinka is essentially just a mountain, but it can also give Karona first strike when necessary, so she can get around death touch creatures, or if people want to gang up and triple block her to kill her, then you just give her first strike, so that gets around that. Then we got Mystifying Maze. It's another way of getting making sure Karona doesn't attack you, but it's one of the weaker ones, and honestly I probably should just take it out. But since it's a land, it doesn't really hurt me to run it. Basically, you pay 5 mana, and if Karona is being attacked, if Karona is attacking you, then you null that attack. Yeah, it's kind of expensive, so not the best. It's honestly like no maze effect or anything, but it is a budget inclusion. So just to wrap things up, I want to show you guys the mana curve of the deck. As you can see, it's pretty aggressively costed. We don't have a lot of 1-drops, we have a fair amount of 2-drops and 3-drops, and that coupled with a lot of ramp means we're basically saving our end game as playing Karona a couple times. We don't have a lot of really other high cost stuff to be playing other than her. So yeah, that's the deck. The idea is to play Karona and then just watch your opponents kill themselves with her. It's really fun, and I hope you guys enjoyed.